Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. Hey folks, I have some really exciting news. I am, at long last, able to make transcripts available for podcast episodes. It's something I have always wanted to do, so I'm really thrilled that I finally can. While I'm not able to edit them to perfection, they are still very good. I'm making them available starting with the newest episodes, working my way back through to add them to previous episodes as time allows. They're available in the show notes link you'll find for each episode in your podcast app. If you use Apple Podcasts, Apple has also made its own auto-generated transcripts available for all podcasts in its app, not just this one. I hope you'll find them useful. My guest this week is Steve Cole, a best-selling children's author of more than 200 books. Those books cover many styles and children's genres, with titles including the Astrosaurs and Young Bond ranges, Go to Sleep or I Let Loose the Leopard, and most recently, Drowning in My Bedroom. He is also the creative consultant for BBC Books' Doctor Who list, as well as project editing and writing titles. Steve and I talk about how TV influenced him as a child, beginning his career in editing, how he moved into writing, and how his editing background influences his writing, and more. Here's my conversation with Steve Cole. Steve, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
So I start everybody with the same question, which is, were you a creative kid or did you discover your creative side later on?
I was a creative kid, I have to admit. Because I've written quite a few books, I get asked sometimes if I always knew I wanted to be a writer. And I normally say that, no, I didn't know that. I knew that I enjoyed messing around with words, and I knew that I enjoyed imaginative play, but I didn't think that it was actually something you could go on to do as a career. So yeah, as a child, I was just very happy inventing worlds, and I still have copies of books I made when I was 7 or 8. The Peter and Anne adventures. And in my imagination, I was playing Peter, the boy investigator, come ghost chaser, come alien defeater, with his sister Anne and their cousin Linda, having adventures that some of which were suspiciously similar to Doctor Who adventures I'd seen on television. But yes, that was very much at the heart of me, being inspired by the stuff that I loved, and wanting to emulate it with through my own kind of filters.
Sure. It's amazing that you still have some of those.
Yes, I now, when I visit school, that I take them with me to say that, if you dream of being a writer but don't feel you're very good at it, allow me to make you feel better by sharing this. You would not think that the person who wrote this had a career as a professional author ahead of them.
So did you have a sister and a cousin that were you were casting in those stories, or did you make them up?
Well, I had, weirdly, my sister played the cousin, and my sister's friend was my sister, probably because I wanted a nicer sister than she was. But chiefly because, my sister was it was her tape recorder. We used to record these adventures originally, you see. And so I was, in a way, novelizing those for posterity. But really, it was just like an episode guide. So there were lots of stories I kind of made up, and a few I based on the original cassette tapes. I probably have them somewhere too. I mean, I am a bit of a hoarder, and it's good to go back and see some of those things that you created when you were little, and sometimes get inspired by them, but more often just think, well, I am a little bit better now.
Probably more than a little bit. Did your family and teachers encourage you, or did they just kind of think, this is just a kid thing?
They did, and right from the start. I mean, on Monday mornings back at school when I was 5 or 6, the first thing we had to do in our school week was called diary, and we would have to write a few lines about what we did at the weekend and draw a picture to illustrate. Simple enough, but after a while I grew bored of always writing the same stuff. I saw my nan, I went to the park, I watched TV, and so one day I wrote, on Saturday my house was attacked by deadly dustbins. but I beat King Dustbin by pushing him out the window, and then drew a very intricate picture of me defeating King Dustbin, or King Trash Can, I should call him, in the States. But and I spent a lot of time on this drawing. Then we had to hand our books in, and I had that awful sense, oh my goodness, I'm going to get into trouble for this. Mrs. Caves is going to realize I was making that up. And so I was full of dread. But it turned out that Mrs. Caves was just as bored reading about my boring life as I was writing about it. And so she actually said, oh, I liked what you did, and I'd like you to make up what happened to you every week now, which was wonderful. It's like this green light to fully indulge these silly imaginative flights of mine. So, it was like on Saturday, I flew to Jupiter in a spaceship that my granddad made, or, it was that. And that was a wonderful release from, the realities of things, which, when you're 5 or 6, it's a fairly structured world. And it's nice to be able to break loose of that. And so I think I was just doing what I did, what others did, like, in the books and the television and the films that I was able to see, which was just taking characters and put them into a situation, whether I was the character or whether someone else was. It didn't matter. It's just those first steps to exploring outside your own reality and imagining what could be there.
That's fantastic. I love when teachers give permission like that. And I'm sure you're right. She probably was really bored reading all of the rest of
Yeah,
it.
so it was an arrangement that suited us both, so that was good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a wonder she didn't extend it to other people in the class for the same reason. But either way, the effect is the same. So when did you start to think that writing might be more than just a fun way to make up adventures?
Well, I'm not sure. Really, it was something that I carried on doing into my teens. I kind of wrote my first book when I was 14, which was called Death on a Boeing 707, which was meant to be a comedy thriller, but was neither very funny or very thrilling, unfortunately. But I completed it, and I think that that's really important, to try and finish something you start creatively, because then you have something that's a finished document that you can look back and say, okay, I did this wrong, that wrong, that wrong. I rushed the ending. I did this. And, it was never something that I intended to send off for attempted publication, but it was something, I just did to pass some time. And those grim pre-internet days, pre-screens and tablets and phones. It was kind of how we rolled. So it was, I think it was probably when I actually started work that I realized that this was, an area that I could perhaps be interested in, because I ended up becoming an editor of the BBC preschool magazines, and 4 pages to fill fortnightly on for various children's properties. And sometimes we had to commission people, but it was actually saving money to write something myself, or and quicker. And because I knew exactly what was needed, I could, there was less editing afterwards. But that's, I think, when I realized that actually this thing that I'd enjoyed doing for all these years could actually be something that could make me, I just thought maybe a little bit of money on the side, and from my main job, which was editing. And it's odd, because I think that editing is a creative thing as well, of course, because you're engaging with someone else's work. And if anything, I think as a child, I think I was probably more suited to editing, because, when I would play games based on things off the TV, I was weirdly acutely aware of their form and their structure. Like one of my favorite TV shows was The Incredible Hulk, if you remember, with Bill Bixby as Dr. David Banner. And I loved that show. It was my second favorite, with Doctor Who, although sometimes when they were actually scheduled opposite each other in the UK, this was terrible for me. I had to kind of like run between one TV and another to try and to keep up with both stories simultaneously. It was very tough. But when I was playing my Hulk games, I was aware that the Hulk, he only appeared twice in the hour-long episode, and you had to have advert breaks. The commercials had to play. So I would leave the commercial break on a important bit, and I would sit down in my game for 3 minutes, pretending that the commercials were on.
Wow.
And then I would pick up at a different scene, because I knew that it wouldn't follow on directly from the scene before. It was a change of a change of cut because you had that fade to black. And so it seems weird that at the age of 6 or 7 that I was quite fluent in the code of television because I was aware of the budget already and I was aware of the special effects needed and the way that the story's structured. I knew that he couldn't just meet aliens or he couldn't just science fiction elements were very rarely in it, so it had to be something criminal based or helping someone he'd come across based. So becoming an editor was made much more sense to me, and that's kind of how I started off.
That's amazing, especially that you observed the commercial break.
I know I look back and I think that's a strange little boy, absurdly obsessed with the form of something. But I think it was just loving it so much. I wanted to emulate not just the characters, but the production and the incidental music and the things that I knew added to the excitement, the sound effects. When David Banner's eyes turned greeny white and he knew that he was about to change into the Hulk, that was the peak of excitement for me, more so than the Hulk's bits himself, because that was a bit because David would be being beaten up or trying to achieve something, being frustrated, and you shared that frustration and knew that the anger was building, and at any minute now there's that sound, and he's off on his way, ripping his shirt and his boots and turning green. I did used to wonder how on earth did he get his duffel bag at the end of the episode, because you left that behind someplace. How would you go back and get that? I mean, it makes no sense. But yes, I was concerned for the bunions he must have because he never seemed to wear socks either. The Hulk's foot always burst through the leather of the shoe, and there was no embarrassing sock to clothe it. So yes, anyway, that's how the Incredible Hulk put me onto a career in editing.
You were a very modern viewer for that age and that time. I don't think anyone much cared about continuity details back then, especially not like they do now.
It is odd, but again, I think form was very important to me because in other areas as well, I loved Marvel comics as well, and in the UK we don't get what we do now, but back then you didn't get the same style of comic. Obviously, in America they were the lovely little glossy covers and they're full color throughout, and in the UK we got glossy covers, but inside was all black and white, and it was like the strips were edited and truncated because it was a weekly thing rather than a monthly thing, so they're quite different. I loved those glossy covers so much that when in 1978, I think 78, 79, the UK had big inflationary problems and the glossy covers were no more, and I went into mourning because it was still the same stuff inside, but it had been wrapped up in this beautiful glossy piece of artwork, and now it wasn't anymore. So it was never quite as good. And when Doctor Who, which was my favorite show, I loved the opening credits so much and the music so much. And when in 1980 that changed and became this synthesized thing and this a star field instead of a creepy time tunnel, again, it was just really dislocating. And I remember feeling confused and discombobulated and actually quite devastated that the show that I loved had changed in an instant from what it had always been. The Doctor was wearing a different costume and the incidental music had changed. So yeah, I don't know why I was kind of so aware of it all, but I think it was all about trying to create an experience. And I think when you're a child and you're happy and secure, the TV you watch, you have certain expectations which in an adventure series like that are almost always realized. And you go away satisfied and feeling happy that you'll have a repeat experience the following week, the next time you see it. And so I suppose having waited for months for Doctor Who to come back for its 1980 series to get this I had to learn to love it all over again, especially as my sister was busy watching Buck Rogers in the 25th Century on the other side. This was serious stuff. I had to go and watch it in black and white on the little portable set in my mum and dad's room. It was hard times.
Wow. And yet, it was great for that kind of series because you mentioned Buck Rogers and the Incredible Hulk, and you had Doctor Who and what was it, the $6 Million Man?
Yeah.
And the Bionic Woman,
Oh
and
yeah.
all of that stuff.
It was a very happy time to be around. It really was.
Yeah, it was great for that kind of thing. So you took all of that and you started editing and then realized that, hey, maybe I could do some writing on the side.
Yeah, and it was one of the first magazines I worked on was called Noddy magazine, and the character of Noddy was created by a writer called Enid Blyton, who in the UK is still, although she died in the 70s and she was active writing in the kind of the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, she's still massively has a massive influence in this country, and would go in to have meetings with her daughter, who helped run the estate in those days, and it was in the Enid Blyton offices where all these books by Enid were around the place, translated into all these different languages. And on the shelf was this old typewriter that Enid Blyton had used. And she was prolific, and she could write up to 9 or 10,000 words a day on that typewriter. And it looked like it had taken a beating over the years. And it was sitting there, and it reminded me of when I was much younger. Occasionally, I would attempt to tap, tap, tap away on my dad's typewriter because it made the writing seem more real. Again,
Mm-hmm.
remember how obsessed with form I was. Well, if it was typed, then it seemed that much more real, like a real story. And it just, seeing Enid Blyton's typewriter made me think about, having a go at this sort of stuff myself. And so, I started to write poems and little short stories aimed at, very young readers. I didn't have any children myself then. And so I was really just hoping for the best in many ways. But it was checked over by the internal editors and went out. And at some point, I think I sent off some of those poems to a publisher who asked me if I wanted to write some little poem pop-up books. And they became the very first books I ever had professionally published back in 1997. So a very, very long time ago.
But they were poems. That's interesting.
They were, and not very good poems. I had some bad. They weren't that great. And there's only 5 poems per book, so because it was very much a paper engineering project. But it was, it's hugely rewarding to be able to, make a bit of additional income, but chiefly get something with my name on it
Mm-hmm.
published. So it wasn't like wasn't like the work I'd been burning to write my whole life, but I was interested in different approaches, in being able to fulfill a brief, if you like. So because these had to be short 4-line poems on the theme was aliens and space, so it wasn't exactly a reach for me with my interests. I could deliver that to a professional standard and have them published accordingly. That was super exciting for me. However stressful my main job was, I found some solace in that.
And it seems like, sort of a gradual escalation of the real factor. Suddenly it's a book. It's a real thing. It's for kids. It's a pop-up book, but it's a real thing.
Mm. Yeah, there was 4 of them all at once, which was because I had to do 4 of these things. So it was exciting to have 4 little titles there. And they were translated into French and into German as well. In fact, I think just if you have no knowledge of German, just reading the German poems aloud is actually funnier than the originals. So I take some solace from that. But it was just it wasn't like I wanted to carry on writing poem pop-up books. I was quite happy being an editor, but yes, it was nice to have that on the side.
So when did you make the switch from primarily editing to primarily writing?
Well, it was a slow burn, but after some years at BBC magazines, I felt promoted into a corner. I'd just gone into it because I wanted to enjoy it was a very creative endeavor, and it was lovely working with authors and illustrators and also being able to write my own stuff. And then I had a team of 2 that I was working with on different magazines. And then I became the group editor there, which meant I was suddenly having to manage a team of 12. And I was only 24 years old. So a lot of these people were older than I was. And, I didn't join it to be a manager.
Mm-hmm.
I joined it because I wanted to do silly stuff with words. So I got horribly stressed out. I was having to give disciplinaries to people and sack people and make people redundant. And this all felt far, far too real for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was much happier in a slightly escapist setting. So I was able to kind of duck a little sideways and downwards because upstairs at BBC Worldwide, I was on the first floor, and on the third floor was the children's book department. And I got wind of the fact that they were taking in the Doctor Who books in house to edit them there. And obviously, I'd never grown out of my infatuation with Doctor Who. So I began to think, well, that would be an interesting switch. I feel like I've done magazines now, and the Doctor Who job would allow me experience of working in books and video and audio, so different media. So I took a few grand less and a pay cut. And they were saying, why do you want to lose money to work on Doctor Who? I said, well, you'll never understand. And so I did. That's what I went to do. So yes, I went down two pay grades, I think, but felt considerably more liberated as a result. I think money can create a bit of a prison for us if we're not careful.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's, which is fine if you want to accumulate wealth, but I guess if you want to be happy while you're trying to do it, then you sometimes have to kind of look outside that velvet cage you fashioned for yourself.
Agreed. Sometimes taking a pay cut is totally worth it.
Mm.
Having done it myself,
You understand.
sometimes it's not necessarily, fun in the moment, but for exactly the reasons you say, if you're in the wrong place, if there's nowhere to go, you're tired of it, whatever it is, it can really be worth it to get out and be somewhere else and do something different. So
Definitely.
I don't think we talk about that enough, but it's true.
It is true. I think it does sort of hold us back in many ways, and not just professionally, but personal as well. The comfort of the familiar,
Mm-hmm.
even if we recognize there are aspects of it that are maybe corroding us on the inside, it takes a lot of bravery to do that. I mean, in the case of the Doctor Who thing, it was less bravery and more like, woohoo, it's Doctor Who. But people said, oh, you'll be like a child in a sweet shop. And of course, leave a child alone in a sweet shop for a while, they're going to come out pretty sick pretty quickly,
Yeah.
which was my experience of working with Doctor Who. So I say that it can be good to sort of strike out, but also make sure it's it's the right direction. The problem for me wasn't the nature of the work; it was the fact that I was the only person doing it,
Mm.
and that was difficult because just the books alone, it was I was having to commission and edit and oversee, project manage 22 80,000 word novels a year.
It's a lot.
Yeah, two every month,
Oof.
apart from December. December, they didn't release them. And on top of that, I had to do video releases every month and write all the blurbs for them and choose the titles and arrange the dispatch of the tapes and get them done. And I had to do quarterly audios as well. And there was also a couple of non-fiction titles annually as well. And just the book side alone, the previous makers of the books, Virgin Publishing, they had about 2.5 people working on the list full time, whereas I was the only person working on the list and also trying to do the other areas of it, and also work through the slush pile and do all the general admin tasks. So I soon worked out that there actually wasn't time to do any of the editing within office hours. Generally, that time was reserved for firefighting, having to go through copy edit queries, proofreader queries, make sure everything was input to the files in the right way, oversee it, send it off, organize the covers. I mean, there was a colossal amount of work. And I would work in the evenings as well, and I'd work weekends.
Wow.
And so it kind of, I maintained, the creative buzz. It was kind of the only thing that dragged me through it, really. But also when I was doing, as well as doing past Doctors having their adventures, I was doing the ongoing new adventures of the Eighth Doctor who was played by Paul McGann. And there are times when I wanted to kind of bring in a new development, and I would write that title myself. So it did give me wonderful on-the-job experience, and it also brought me some quite bruising reviews early on. But I learned quite a lot from that. But also, I think if you want to appreciate what your authors are going through, you need to kind of go through it yourself and work with an editor yourself. So, which is what I did. And again, it was very instructive. And I found that I enjoyed both sides of the process. And so I certainly wasn't looking to give up editing. I just had to give up part of the workload. So I slowly dismantled it after I think I was only there full time in the job, less than 2 years because I was absolutely burnt out. But then I kept up one strand of the books and let someone else edit the others, and then I transferred to a position within children's books, so I didn't have to worry about the videos or the audios anymore. So I was able to kind of clear some space on my plate a bit to take on other tasks, and I managed to get sort of a staff writer job at BBC Books, which meant that I was able to write titles for other children's TV properties, such as Walking with Dinosaurs or various of the other sort of younger TV programs out there at the time. And that was, again, good experience and made me realize that being a writer editor was where I was happiest, being able to do bits of both. And I think that led me to writing TV and film tie-ins for other publishers as well, because I found that the BBC was, after 6 years of working there, was becoming a little bit stifling, and saw there was a job coming up at another publisher and left for that. So that's when I kind of defected to books. It was Penguin UK that I was working for on the children's books, and I realized then that I'd left the magazines behind me now, and books was where I was going. And that kind of, I suppose, focused my desires to carry on writing in that sphere.
Wow. It just hearing you describe those 2 years sounds so overwhelming. I'm
Yes,
both unsurprised that it was only 2 years and amazed that you made it that long.
I'm kind of, yeah, I look back and it's the same. I kind of developed, I called them 3-tier days during the week, which would be you'd work your working hours, get in at 9:30 and work till 6. That was your first tier. Then you might go out and see one of your authors in the evening and have drinks and chat with them, which was tier 2. And then on the train back home, you'd get on with the editing and do that when you got in until the early hours. Repeat repeat day after day. So I got quite a good facility for editing whilst slightly tipsy, which which would still be a good step. There were times when, the following day I'll be thinking, uh-oh, I don't even remember editing this last night. But I'd check back and I'd think, wow, I caught everything. So I was quite impressed with myself. Obviously it's not something I recommend, or especially not long term. But it was good to know that in a tight spot I could, because the work always needed to be done. There was always the next two titles. I used to joke that you know every time I went to the bathroom, nothing was happening in the world of Doctor Who. And then if I was to die at my desk, eventually, weeks later, people might say, "Hey, weren't we meant to have had two more Doctor Who books out by now?" And they'd find my figure hidden under the desk or something. So yes, it wasn't a very nurturing environment, but I was very motivated because I cared so passionately about the subject matter, about doing the best by it that I could. It was just frustrating that you just weren't allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't the day, didn't allow it. So technically, it's the Earth's fault for rotating in 24 hours. We should probably, if you could just slowed it down to maybe 36, that would have been okay.
That would have been helpful. Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and especially when you were writing something too. I mean, that takes up a good chunk of time all on its own, on
yeah,
top
I
of
would.
everything else.
So I would take my annual leave. I would spend writing stuff. So it wasn't like I was
Ah.
I was having a break from work. I would be just setting myself different work. But I used to say, a change is as good as a rest. And sometimes I'd try and go away for a week someplace to a cottage by the sea and do the writing there, nice and quiet. So I suppose I found solitude quite enjoyable and helpful, because these were days before you could always keep in touch with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to make a phone call, you went down the phone box, and the public payphone and talk there, rather than being able to do it all the time. So there were fewer distractions, I suppose, and I think that was certainly helpful to me.
Wow. So you moved on and mostly were doing writing.
Writing and editing still, but when I went off to Penguin Books, and I was working for an imprint called Ladybird, which did stuff
Mm.
again for younger readers. I found that I was having to, the position was managing editor. And again, I was having to manage some staff, and I was also having to be in charge of promotional materials, which I really didn't see as part of my job. And it was a fairly awkward time for the company because they were busy closing down the original Ladybird group, who were based a few hours in the north of England. And there was a lot of discontent amongst that team. And I was finding that certain projects have been undertaken would be pretty much finished, only to have all support from the sales team removed at the last minute for whatever reason. So it became frustrating, and agents were complaining, and the whole situation felt not a step up from what I've been doing. So I thought, well, I've been keeping up this writing in my spare time. I've been writing projects, for Penguin, I wrote the Charlie's Angels action file, for example. Angel Power it was called, and I changed my name to Samantha Cole for that one because the kind of the girl power thing didn't ring through with Stephen Cole plastered all over the top of it. But it made me think, well, maybe if I can just get enough writing and editorial work, maybe I can pack in having to do this job that I don't enjoy so much. And you'll relate to this as well when you're caught in circumstances that you don't enjoy, and eventually you feel this is untenable. I can't stay with this. I want to see if I can make a go of it somewhere else. And so I did, and I only stayed there. In fact, I only stayed there, I think, 7 months before I gave my notice, and I had to serve 3 months more notice. But I was already out of there, and I was writing audio stuff for Doctor Who. I think I did proofreading and typesetting. I was happy to do anything to do with the process of books, setting the words into proper book form. That was something I was happy to do. And if, another publisher would say, can you write this book on Thunderbirds for us, or this one on Shrek, or Madagascar, or The Incredibles, or Finding Nemo, or Scooby-Doo 2, or Mr. Bean, or the Koala Brothers. And I was, I was enjoying the variety of it. And I was enjoying the challenge of trying to, get the voices of these shows, get something that would, appease the, whatever person was checking these words over at Disney or DreamWorks, getting stuff that they would accept. It became a challenge to kind of produce something that was right and needed very little changes, very few changes. So that was a good thing. And I suppose, again, it goes back to that awareness of form and voice that I got from my ridiculous playing Hulk games, being aware of that form again. But it meant that rather than express something that might have been inside myself, I was enjoying dipping into these different worlds and expressing what the core values of those were. In a way, it felt like a shield, I suppose, from something I might create myself. I was in my 20s and I didn't yet feel perhaps confident enough to go, or moved to go and present my own titles to the world back then. It was only when I was actually approached by an agent who asked me if I had anything original she would like to represent me. She said, I won't take a cut of the work you're doing for your existing publishers. I don't think I'll be able to improve on those deals. They're fairly basic, one-off fees. It's fine, it's bread and butter work, but I won't be able to improve those for you, so I wouldn't seek to take 15% or whatever. So I liked honesty, and I liked, I felt that, she had integrity. And in fact, she'd been the publishing director when I wrote the Charlie's Angels book. And when she left Penguin to set up a children's list, I was, it was, I guess because we'd got on during the process, she was, it felt nice to be in at the start of something new. So that gave me, in a way, the confidence, I think, to start actively generating my own material rather than being offered jobs and accepting them, which was quite a crucial difference, because suddenly you had to work on spec, which is a dangerous thing when you're not getting a regular paycheck.
Yeah.
And, you have bills to pay and a mortgage to to worry about. So I think maybe that kind of focused me. I was very quick at writing in those days as well, a lot more energy than I have now as a 52-year-old man. So I guess I was quick and to do it and was able to do the other jobs that were paying money, slot them in around those early things. And when I didn't get the first thing I came up with, got some kind rejections and some offers of lunch and discussions. It never got anywhere. And that had been based on a few sample chapters and a synopsis. And my agent said, for the next thing, I think you need to write the whole thing so they can see what it's like, see what the tone is like, finish it, you know. And I thought, well, I wanted to write a big young adult book, but I thought I haven't got time to write a big young adult book. It could take months. Why don't I write something shorter as a placeholder, just to keep my name circulating? Mm-hmm. And so I wrote this book called Astrosaurs, which is kind of inspired by the Walking with Dinosaurs books that I've written, and feeling sad that the dinosaurs had been wiped out by the meteor. I think it wouldn't be a much happier end for their story if actually they'd seen that meteor coming and they'd built a fleet of spaceships and taken off before it hit.
Obviously, yeah.
Obviously. And that's 65 million years ago. They'd be way out in space by now, wouldn't they? They'd be in another part of space, call it the Jurassic Quadrant. It almost wrote itself, when I kind of presented this book to my agent who read it and said, oh, okay, so it's Star Trek with dinosaurs. And I was like, how dare you? How dare you belittle it and reduce it to 4 words? But of course, this is the hallmark of a good saleable idea.
Right.
If you can dilute it right down to 4 words, not dilute it, concentrate it to 4 words, that's your pitch, that's your nutshell pitch. Star Trek with dinosaurs. And suddenly 3 publishers wanted to publish it, which was, amazing, I think, because it was a fairly easy concept to get their head around. And my dismay at how easily it had been summarized faded a little when I found out that Gene Roddenberry, when he was selling Star Trek, he pitched it as Wagon Trail to the Stars. So he was trading on an existing TV show, but giving it a space twist. And I was taking a space scenario and giving it a twist with dinosaurs. So I guess that's kind of quite instructive. And so while you can't always necessarily take 2 contrasting things and make a hit with it, like you can't say, I know, Prison Break with badgers or something. Although that might be a good idea, I don't know. I guess sometimes it can strike a chord. Obviously kids like dinosaurs, kids like space. So like people were saying, oh, you were very clever, sort of putting together 2 things that kids like. I said, actually, it didn't happen that way. It happened much more organically from stuff that I'd already been working on and stuff that I enjoyed. So I don't think you can cynically take these things, but if it can come from a place inside you that feels happy and enjoys creating that kind of stuff, then that's a good thing. I think that's where everything overlaps, and creativity can start to equal financial reward as well, which is kind of the dream. So I was very lucky that happened for me, almost by accident. It certainly wasn't the young adult title that I'd thought my name, Stephen Cole, would be all over. In fact, I called the Astrosaurs by Steve Cole because I felt, well, this is for younger readers and it's not my proper authorial name, I'll be Steve Cole. And then, of course, Steve Cole was the name that took off because the Astrosaurs became very successful, and that led to me writing lots of other books for readers who are like 8 to 12. And so, all those plans for Stephen Cole's magnum opus kind of like went on the back burner for quite a while. And I've always enjoyed being Steve Cole, so I have no complaints. Actually, again, I took I was reassured to find that Stan Lee, he'd been wanting to sort of save his name for his big book, Stanley Lieberman, I think his name is. And so for the comics, he just went for Stan Lee because it was like a shorter name, and if it all went wrong, then it wouldn't become, he wouldn't have, sullied his name in that way. Right. Of course, we know what happened there. So quite often I think life is what happens while you're busy making other plans.
Mm-hmm.
And, that can work out to your advantage if you're prepared to ride that train and see where it goes.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, since you spent so much time editing, how that's influenced your writing and your writing process.
It's meant that I'm quite happy to be edited, and I'm very unprecious about what I write. In fact, editors would despair of me because I was always changing my stuff up to the last minute, long after they had said, no, it's fine, we've edited it, it's fine. I think he who lives by the red pen dies by the red pen, and is quite interested in seeing other people's red pen. I think if you respect your editor and you understand that they're working for the good of the book, if not the blood pressure of the author, once you get past that, I think it can be a very fruitful relationship. I always, say my wisdom on this matter, such as it is that it's the author's job to be clever, and it's the editor's job to be wise.
Mm.
And I think that is true, because sometimes the author is too close to something and can't necessarily see what wants to do something, whereas the editor with less personal stuff invested, who wants to do the best both by the author and by the book, they can bring something that's not a tempering influence. You don't want to feel like you're restraining an author, but hopefully a different way to help them fly. And that's kind of I've always enjoyed about editing, is finding a different way to do something that pleases me and them, and which we both feel is an improvement on the original. An original can always be improved on. It's our first run down the track. Chances are we can best our personal speed on that run the next time we do it, or the next. So I think we shouldn't ever fear having to change things, whether in our lives or our work, but we should try and make sure we have people we trust around us when it happens. I think that might be an idea.
Well, and that's really the thing, right? Because you need an editor you can trust. I've always been of the opinion that, any good, smart writer knows that they need a good editor. You need someone to save you from yourself.
Well, this is exactly it. Yes. Who knows what dark alleys you can go down sometimes. I mean, it has, there are moments when you kind of, I can't pretend it's always been like, happiness and joy. I once sold a trilogy called Z-Rex, or Z-Rex in America, of course. I sold it to UK and US publisher at the same time, which was wonderful on the advance fee front, but less wonderful because I was having to take in two different lots of edits at the same time, because they were pretty much publishing at the same schedules. So in a way, you became a servant of two masters at that point, which was quite tricky, especially when they were both pulling in different directions. So there was, a US version of the book, and there was a UK version of the book, because I'd have to do different creative decisions in both, and I found that difficult. So
Yeah.
didn't make a habit of that one. I kind of learned my lesson.
Wow.
Because that's what happens though. If you only write the opening chapters and then a synopsis, then of course you have to write the book whilst you're under contract. You lose some of that creative freedom. You get the money to fund you while you write it, which is great, but you don't have necessarily the fullest freedom, because yes, suddenly you are beholden to two people. But it's all part of the experience. It's all part of I believe that every experience, good or bad, is very, very important, because it can take us in different directions. It can open our eyes to what could happen. Sometimes it can show us what's possible, what we'd like to have more of in our lives, and other times it says, no, retreat, back off, get away from this thing right now.
Yeah. Well, and knowing when to retreat is a skill unto itself too.
Yes, not always the easiest one to master, for sure. But it's also an interesting one, because sometimes you don't get a choice to run away. Sometimes you're sort of slightly forcibly evicted. Being a writer, you have part of your job is reinventing yourself periodically, unless you're only known for a handful of books and one big property, which is fine and fantastic if you then sort of like can live off the different exploitations of that. That's brilliant, of course. But if you want to try lots of different areas, then you have to accept that some will be more successful than others, and some that maybe you really loved and wish you could do more of, just aren't, you're not hitting that curve in the right way, or there's too many other people already there, or you need a change of thought. So sometimes it can feel like doors are closing, at which point, of course, you have to look for the door that's opening, because you'll always find one. You may have to kick it down as hard as you possibly can to get in. But once you find it, then chances are you have another chance to do that. And who knows, where this one's going to lead you? Who knows where that door's going to take you to? So yeah, even if things aren't going so well, I think looking for the doorways is important.
I think that's very good advice. Yeah, especially, in the you don't know where it's going to lead you department. I
Yeah,
think a lot of people, if you look back when you've, made a decision and followed a particular open door, you have no idea. And, you know, you could end up anywhere, places that you couldn't imagine, just because it's kind of like, those choose your own adventure books when we were kids,
yeah,
right?
love
Like
them.
you don't know where this is going to take you. And some of them, in half a page, you're dead. But most of them, you end up on some further adventure
That's
that
right.
you couldn't predict. That's the whole point of those books.
And where possible, keep that page turned so you can always go back to it in case
Yes.
you did die after half a page. That was I never used to go back to the start. I always just go back to a couple of spots. So yeah, I think what we're saying there is definitely look for the open doors, but maybe carry a can of mace and a flashlight with you as you go, in case the going gets tough.
Yeah. Don't bolt that first door behind you just in
Yeah,
case. If
very
you
very
can
true.
if you can help it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I'm also wondering when you were doing the BBC books with Doctor Who, it seems to me both with the Virgin books and the BBC books, that so many people came through there, you know, submitted something and got published and have gone on to do so many other things that that was a door for them. Were
Hmm.
you aware of that when you were editing those books? Did you have any sense that some of these people were going to go on to bigger and better things beyond what they were doing for you?
Yeah, certainly. Which was part of the excitement of it. I already knew that certain authors from the Virgin range were diversifying and going to work in different media. Of course, many of the Virgin writers ended up writing for Doctor Who, the TV series, and some of the authors I worked with have gone on to write their own novels and things. I think there was a big difference and a clear divide back in those days between people who wanted to be writers and people who wanted to be Doctor Who writers. Because
Mm.
there were some people who they just wanted to write Doctor Who, which is fine, I could completely understand that, and they were very, very good at it. But you sort of wished as well that they would take those talents and do something else with them, because they had so much to offer to a readership beyond that which Doctor Who had, which in those days was actually quite niche. So yes, I think that it can be a stepping stone to other things, anything that we enjoy. I mean, I'm now, oddly, I'm now the creative editor of the BBC Books Doctor Who list on a freelance level. So, as well as still writing children's books, I actually came back to the job that I left behind because I passed it on to a lovely author and human being called Justin Richards, who then passed it back to me in about 15, 16 years later. So, between the two of us, we've kind of looked over that list for good 25 plus years, but have Justin went on to do lots of other writing for different children's books, different genres, and so did I. So it's something that obviously means a lot to us and is very important, but didn't define our creative ambitions, I suppose. So it can give inspiration and experience, but it's always good to try other stuff as well. At least that was my personal feeling. So yes, I always applauded some of the authors I worked with when they went off into other adventures with words. And I thought that was very exciting, and I was happy to have played a small part in the journey that they had had.
Yeah. I think there are, I wouldn't want to try to guess how many there are, but I think there are a decent number
Mm, yeah,
from back then.
absolutely. Well, Russell T Davies
I
has
was just going to
written a
say.
novel for Virgin. Yeah, I mean, I think he's up to something currently with Doctor Who right now. I think, yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Um, Stephen Moffat, of course, had also written a short story for Virgin. And since then, I've been so lucky, of course, because as editor of Doctor Who books, I've got to work with Russell and with Stephen and with other of the TV script writers on the novelizations of their books. And that was, a big, a big thrill, but also very intimidating because, you have, writers like Russell and Stephen who have, done so much and achieved so much, but you have to go in as an editor and treat the book on its own terms, regardless of who's written it, and engage with the authors. And of course, as authors, they're happy to engage with the experience. So yes, it was happy times working on those, and also lovely to get to experience their work on a slightly more personal basis. I mean, I felt that as well when I was, lucky enough to edit Terence Dicks, who was a man who wrote a lot of the Doctor Who novelizations when I was growing up. And they were pretty much all I read. That and Spider-Man comics and the Peanuts cartoon strip. Doctor Who novelizations were everything. They were the only adventures you could get when it wasn't on TV. And so to actually work with Terence, who basically taught me how to read, was extraordinary, And then to help him out, with the writing of some of his stuff when things were a little bit fraught for him, was like, wow, I'm getting to, there are sections here I'm getting to ghostwrite Terence Dicks. This is extraordinary. And, he dedicated one of the books to me. I think one called Players, I think. It said, for Steve Cole, an editorial raft in the stormy sea of deadline. And I thought, gosh, I went from seeing him in my local library at aged 8, thinking, I would love to do what you do, when he was giving a talk there about the books. And I saw him again at 13, when he was giving a different talk in the same library. And then suddenly we were meeting at the BBC Club, eating steak and chips, drinking red wine, discussing the next Doctor Who book. So I think words and creativity can pull you on this extraordinary journey that can sometimes come full circle and sometimes can just lead you in directions that you never expected. So, I have to say, Doctor Who's been an enormous influence on my life, especially as, there have been times where it's looked like, when it stopped in 1989, I couldn't imagine it ever coming back. But, it still lay there like this underlying strength, I suppose, still being able to enjoy it and discuss it and think about it. And then, of course, came bursting back, and I've been so lucky to be involved in that in a small way.
I can't help but wonder, have you thought about what your 8-year-old self or your 13-year-old self would have thought if they'd had any idea that this was what you would end up doing?
I think their little heads would have exploded. Certainly. So that's why I tell children when I go around schools now. I say, it seems like a long shot, but if you do have a dream of doing something, then it's worth following. To be honest, I didn't follow mine very closely. I went in a different direction, and it led me back around there anyway. So it's never too late to get into something that you enjoy if you have the skills and if you're willing to develop the skills and work with them. But you need that spark first and foremost, and you need to have a willingness to move on to something else if something you really want isn't working out. If you stay with that doggedly, chances are you won't succeed. But if you go off and get experience somewhere else, whether it's life experience or practical experience in what you're trying to achieve, I believe that's hugely important.
Absolutely. And you're right. You never know where it'll lead. So many things in life, you never know where they'll lead, but that's why it's worth exploring them. Well, thank you so much for coming and talking with me today. This has been so interesting and encouraging, I think. I hope for any writers or any other type of creative folks who are listening.
Well, I hope so. And thank you very much for having me.
That's this week's episode. Thanks so much to Steve Cole for joining me and to you for listening. Please leave a review for this episode. There is a link right in your podcast app, so it's really easy and it will only take a minute. If you enjoyed our conversation, I hope you'll share it with a friend. Thanks so much. If this episode resonated with you, or if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, join me at The Spark on Substack as we form a community that supports and celebrates each other's creative courage. It's free, and it's also where I'll be adding programs for subscribers and listeners. The link is in your podcast app, so sign up today. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners.